The courtroom went dead silent. Every camera froze on the woman standing at the plaintiff's table, a woman dripping in diamonds, her manicured hand resting lazily on a $6,000 handbag like she was posing for a magazine shoot, rather than standing before a federal judge. The air was thick with disbelief. Somewhere in the audience, a spectator audibly gasped. Even the bailiff's stoic expression flickered for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Because a few seconds earlier, that woman, Karen Whitfield, 42 years old, self-proclaimed real estate visionary, had just laughed in Judge Judy's face. Not a nervous giggle, not a polite chuckle. A full, unrestrained, contemptuous laugh that echoed through the television studio and instantly became the kind of soundbite the internet lives for. "Oh, please," she'd sneered, her voice sharp with the entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. "You're just a TV judge, not a real one. I make more in a week than you've made in a month sitting behind that little desk." For a single suspended heartbeat, you could feel reality itself pause. Then Judge Judy set down her pen. Slowly, deliberately. The motion was so small, so controlled, that the audience could sense what was coming long before she spoke. Her eyes lifted. Those famous, steel-grey eyes that had reduced conmen, scammers, and liars to trembling apologies for decades, and locked on Karen like the crosshairs of moral retribution. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, her voice low even, and far more terrifying than if she'd shouted, "I strongly suggest you choose your next words very, very carefully." But Karen didn't. Because Karen Whitfield was the kind of woman who believed money could buy everything: respect, truth, and even justice. She had strutted into that courtroom certain she was untouchable, certain she could manipulate the narrative like she had in every other part of her life. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy had already seen right through her. She had the documents. She had the receipts. And within the next 20 minutes, the world would watch as Karen's empire of lies came crashing down, live, in front of millions. When the clip finally hit the internet, it would explode across every social platform imaginable. Rich Karen mocks Judge Judy. Instant karma caught on camera. Within 24 hours, it would rack up over 60 million views, spark debates on arrogance and privilege, and become the defining viral moment of the year. But here's the thing. Most people don't. They know what really happened before those 60 seconds. Her viral glory is far more fascinating than what the cameras captured. The arrogance didn't start in that courtroom. It started long before one in boardrooms, country clubs, and private charity events, where Karen Whitfield learned the dangerous illusion that power equals immunity. This is the story of how that illusion shattered, how Judge Judy turned a courtroom into a moral battlefield, and how one rich woman's smug laughter became the sound of her entire reputation collapsing in real time. Before we dive into how one arrogant millionaire managed to humiliate herself on national television, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone so confident, so dripping in entitlement, that you just knew karma was about to knock on their door? Because what you're about to see isn't just courtroom drama. It's poetic justice. When this episode aired, comment sections across the internet lit up like wildfire. Viewers couldn't get enough of the moment Judge Judy's calm expression turned into that signature storm. The one that always means someone's about to learn a very expensive lesson in humility. And this time, the target wasn't a petty thief or a small-time scammer. It was a millionaire socialite who had spent her life buying her way out of every consequence until she walked into this courtroom. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone like Karen, someone who looked down on others just because of the car they drove or the clothes they wore? Tell me in the comments how you handled it, because trust me, what Judge Judy did next is something we all wish we could do to people like that. And if you believe that arrogance should always meet accountability, hit that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because this story, it doesn't just restore faith in justice, it shows what happens when truth finally stands up to wealth and wins. Now, let's rewind to where it all began, before the cameras, before the laughter, and before one woman's arrogance became her undoing. Before Karen Whitfield became known as the woman who mocked Judge Judy and lost everything, she was the queen of her own little empire. A 42-year-old real estate broker from Palm Beach, Florida, Karen wasn't just rich. She was the kind of rich that liked to announce it. Her life was curated like a magazine spread: oceanfront penthouse, imported Italian marble floors, a walk-in closet bigger than most apartments, and a fleet of luxury cars that screamed, "Look at me." On the surface, Karen was polished perfection: blonde curls always styled, teeth as white as her Range Rover, and a wardrobe filled with designer power suits meant to intimidate. But underneath that carefully painted mask was someone who had built her fortune not on brilliance but on manipulation. She didn't negotiate deals, she bent people. Clients, employees, even family members. In Palm Beach circles, she was known as Queen Whitfield. She hosted charity galas not to give back but to collect favors. Every friendship had a price tag, every conversation an agenda. She once told a business partner, "Kindness is a strategy, not a virtue," and she meant it. Her rise had been quick, ruthless, and paved with broken trust. She had started as a small-time agent, working under an older mentor named Doris Langley, a kind woman who taught her everything about real estate ethics and integrity. Within 2 years, Karen had stolen 3 of Doris's biggest clients, fabricated rumors that Doris was mismanaging funds, and walked away with the firm's best listings. Doris's career crumbled, and Karen's thrived. But Karen wasn't satisfied with success. She wanted worship. When she walked into a room, she expected deference. Assistants spoke only when spoken to. Waiters were invisible. She once bragged at a country club dinner that she'd never waited in line in her life. And if she ever had to, she'd buy the business just to skip it. Her arrogance didn't stop there. Karen developed a reputation for suing anyone who stood in her way: neighbors, contractors, even her own housekeeper. "Litigation is leverage," she told her followers during one of her online Empowered Women of Wealth live streams. The irony, of course, was that she didn't empower anyone. She intimidated, threatened, and bulldozed until people gave her what she wanted. But behind the glamour and bravado, the cracks were starting to show. Her marriage had collapsed 2 years earlier, her husband leaving after she publicly berated him at a charity auction for bidding too low. Her business, while still profitable, was under quiet investigation for misrepresentation, clients claiming they'd been pressured into unethical deals. And in private, Karen was more desperate than she'd ever admit. That desperation was about to push her into the one fight she couldn't win, when an elderly widow named Martha Ellis accused Karen of withholding escrow funds after a failed property sale. Karen dismissed her as a senile old woman looking for attention, but Martha wasn't senile. She was sharp, meticulous, and she had kept every email, every receipt, and every recorded voicemail Karen had ever sent. Still, Karen wasn't worried. She'd beaten dozens of complaints before. A little charm, a little intimidation, a little legal jargon, and it always worked. And when Martha's lawyer suggested taking the case to small claims television court, Karen laughed. "Judge Judy, please," she scoffed over champagne to her friends. "That woman's a performer, not a real judge. I'll go on her show, make her look ridiculous, and get some free publicity out of it." That single decision, born of arrogance, greed, and overconfidence, would mark the beginning of her public downfall. Because in Judge Judy's courtroom, arrogance doesn't intimidate justice. It triggers it. Before the flashing cameras, before the viral headlines, there was Martha Ellis, a 72-year-old widow whose quiet dignity stood in absolute contrast to the woman trying to destroy her. Martha wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. But she was something far rarer in Karen Whitfield's world: honest. She had spent 40 years building a modest life with her late husband, Daniel, a retired school principal who had once promised her, "When I'm gone, you'll never have to worry about money." Together, they'd saved every penny, investing carefully in small rental properties around Boca Raton. Nothing flashy, just enough to keep her comfortable. After Daniel's death 2 years earlier, Martha had decided to downsize, sell one of the old properties, and move closer to her daughter in Orlando. That's where Karen came in. Martha first met her at an open house. Karen's handshake was firm, her smile wide, her tone dripping with confidence. "Don't worry, Mrs. Ellis," she said, leaning in with rehearsed warmth. "I specialize in helping women like you. I'll handle everything. You won't lift a finger." For a woman still adjusting to life without her husband, it was comforting to hear. So when Karen offered to manage the sale personally, Martha agreed. She signed the paperwork, trusting, like so many others, that professionalism and kindness still meant something. At first, things seemed fine. Karen listed the property, advertised aggressively, and even sent Martha occasional updates, all written in that sugary, performative tone Karen had mastered so well. But when the first buyer backed out, something changed. Martha noticed the listing quietly disappeared online. Karen stopped returning calls. Weeks passed. Then a second offer came through and vanished just as mysteriously. When Martha finally reached Karen's assistant, she was told, "The deal's delayed due to escrow verification issues." But that wasn't true. A few weeks later, Martha received a letter from the buyer's agent, a letter that made her stomach drop. The buyer had transferred the escrow amount, nearly $48,000, directly to Karen's business account. The sale had fallen through, but Karen had never returned the money. Instead, she'd claimed processing fees and contractual deductions, totaling the entire amount. Martha drove to Karen's office the next morning, clutching the letter with trembling hands. She wasn't angry, not yet. Just confused. She thought there must have been a mistake. But when she entered that glossy, glass-walled office, Karen didn't even look up from her phone. She just waved a manicured hand dismissively and said, "Oh, please, Martha, don't get emotional. You signed the paperwork. It's business." Something inside Martha broke that day. She'd lived through hardship and the loss of her husband, cancer, recessions, but nothing compared to the helplessness of being treated like she didn't matter. She had spent her entire life believing decency was rewarded. That truth always found its way to the surface. But in that moment, staring at Karen's smirk behind that oversized mahogany desk, she realized that people like Karen didn't play by the same rules. Still, Martha wasn't one to give up. She started documenting everything, every message, every transaction, every call. When Karen stopped responding entirely, Martha filed a formal complaint with the Florida Real Estate Commission, then another with the Small Claims Court. It should have ended there. But Karen, furious that a nobody widow dared to challenge her, decided to retaliate. She filed a defamation lawsuit against Martha, claiming emotional distress and reputational damage. That's how both women ended up on Judge Judy's docket. One, rich, polished, and dripping arrogance. The other, quiet, grieving, but armed with truth. And neither of them knew that what was about to unfold in that courtroom would go far beyond real estate or money. It would become a public reckoning between entitlement and integrity, one that would capture the entire internet's attention. Audience members filled every seat. The production crew whispered last-minute checks, and even the bailiff seemed unusually alert. Everyone knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. The lawsuit had been framed as a simple contract dispute. Karen Whitfield was suing Martha, Ellis for defamation and damaging her professional reputation. Martha had filed a countersuit, demanding the return of her missing $48,000 in escrow funds. To anyone glancing at the docket, it looked like just another civil argument between a dissatisfied client and a stubborn broker. But the moment Karen walked in, it was clear this wasn't ordinary. She entered the courtroom like she owned it, chin lifted, sunglasses perched dramatically atop her hair, a white designer suit perfectly tailored to her every curve. Every camera found her instantly. She smiled at them, practiced, poised, and utterly unshaken. To her, this wasn't a trial. It was a stage. Meanwhile, Martha sat quietly at the defendant's table, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple blue cardigan and a silver locket around her neck, the same one her husband had given her on their 25th anniversary. Inside it were two pictures, one of Daniel, one of their first house. She had brought it for strength. Judge Judy entered with her usual brisk efficiency. The room rose, then sat. The cameras zoomed in as she scanned the case file in front of her. You could tell even from her expression that she already sensed something was off. "Mrs. Whitfield," Judge Judy began, her tone clipped but polite, "you're claiming that the defendant made false accusations against you that cost you clients and damaged your reputation. Is that correct?" Karen's lips curved into a smirk. "That's correct, Your Honor. This woman," she gestured dramatically toward Martha, "has been spreading lies about me all over social media. She's told people I stole money from her, that I'm some kind of scam artist. I've been in real estate for over 15 years. I have an impeccable record. These baseless accusations could destroy my career. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction, the first faint glimmer of suspicion. And Mrs. Ellis, what's your response? Martha's voice was steady, calm, but there was pain beneath it. Everything I said was true, Your Honor. She took the escrow money from my property sale and never returned it after the deal fell through. I have the documents and bank transfers to prove it. Karen scoffed audibly, loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. Oh, please. She's confused. She doesn't understand how escrow works. That money was legally mine under the terms of the contract. That's when Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, that famous look that had dismantled more liars than any cross-examination in television history. Do you have a copy of this contract, Mrs. Whitfield? Karen smiled smugly and produced a folder from her expensive leather bag, sliding it across the plaintiff's table with exaggerated elegance. Right here, Your Honor, everything in black and white. Judge Judy began reading, slowly. Her pen tapped rhythmically against the desk as her eyes scanned the pages. The audience was silent, watching her expression. And when her brows suddenly knit together, the air seemed to freeze. This contract is dated 2 weeks after the failed sale, Judy said finally, her tone razor-sharp. Mrs. Ellis, is this your signature? Martha leaned forward, squinting slightly, and shook her head. No, ma'am. I've never seen that paper before. Karen's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch. Judge Judy turned the page again, her pen still tapping. Mrs. Whitfield, who drafted this document? Karen hesitated. My assistant. She handles most of my paperwork. Does she have a law degree? Karen blinked, confused. Excuse me? Judy's voice was calm but lethal. Does your assistant have a law degree? Because this contract contains language that mirrors a specific Florida escrow exemption clause, one that was struck down 5 years ago. Meaning? She paused, letting the silence hang like a noose. Whoever wrote this either copied an outdated legal template, or they forged this document to justify keeping money that didn't belong to them. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Karen's smirk had vanished completely. She shifted in her seat, adjusting her blazer, forcing a nervous laugh. Well, I'm sure it was just a clerical error. We use standard templates, but Judy wasn't buying it. She marked something in her notes, then looked up, her eyes cold, her tone final. We'll come back to that. That was the moment when Karen's world began to tilt. The audience didn't know it yet, but the first domino had just fallen. If there was one thing Karen Whitfield had mastered in life, it was the art of doubling down. When most people felt the walls closing in, she built higher ones. When others apologized, she deflected. And when the truth began to corner her, as it was now under Judge Judy's sharp gaze, she reached for her favorite weapon, manipulation. The courtroom had gone still. Judge Judy was rereading the suspicious contract while Martha sat quietly, her hands folded. For a brief, uncomfortable moment, Karen realized that her performance wasn't landing the way she'd imagined. The audience wasn't impressed by her elegance or her confident tone. They were skeptical. The usual charm that once made investors trust her with millions was falling flat under Judy's scrutiny. But Karen wasn't done. Your Honor, she began again, her voice taking on that practiced sweetness she used during sales pitches. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Mrs. Ellis is confused. She's an elderly woman who's been through a lot, and honestly I feel terrible for her. That's why I never wanted this to go this far. I was just trying to protect my business. It was a deliberate move, the sympathy pivot. Paint herself as the misunderstood professional, and her opponent as the fragile, confused senior. She even turned slightly toward the audience, her expression softening, as if she were doing them a favor by being patient with all this nonsense. But Judge Judy wasn't a daytime therapist. She was a human lie detector, with a lifetime of experience watching people twist sincerity into strategy. Protect your business, Judy repeated slowly, leaning forward, by keeping someone's money without legal justification. Karen's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. There's not like that, she said, her voice rising defensively. I used part of that money for administrative fees, relisting costs, and Mrs. Whitfield, Judy interrupted, her tone turning surgical. Are you telling me that when a sale fails, You believe it's acceptable to personally use funds that belong to your client. Karen hesitated. Well, technically it was in the contract. The forged contract, Judy shot back. Karen froze. The word forged hit like a gavel crack. I didn't forge anything. She snapped, her composure slipping. You're twisting my words. No, ma'am, Judy replied evenly. I'm clarifying them. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Karen's posture stiffened, and a faint tremor of anger began creeping up her neck. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control of the narrative. And then she made her fatal mistake. If you'd ever dealt with real estate at my level, she said, waving dismissively toward the judge, you'd understand that things aren't so black and white. But of course you wouldn't, you're just reading from a script. A gasp erupted from the gallery. Even the bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Judge Judy's pen stopped moving, slowly, precisely. The pause was deafening. Then came that voice, quiet, but laced with steel. Did you just imply that I don't understand the law, Mrs. Whitfield? Karen stammered. I didn't mean— Oh, I think you did, Judy cut in. And I think everyone in this room heard it, including the cameras. The tension in the room thickened like fog. Karen's smile faltered completely. She could feel the attention turning against her, every camera, every eye, every unspoken judgment closing in. Her act was unraveling, and she knew it. Still, she pushed on, desperate to regain ground. I'm just saying, this whole process feels biased. Everyone's already on her side because she's old and soft-spoken. You can't even imagine what it's like to run a business as a woman in a man's world. There it was, the ultimate pivot. Turn the spotlight away from her crimes and onto her supposed victimhood. But it didn't work. Judge Judy leaned back, eyes narrowing. Mrs. Whitfield, I've spent 45 years dealing with people from every possible walk of life, business owners, veterans, single mothers, retirees, and yes, women who built their success through hard work and honesty. You are not one of them. You are not a victim of sexism. You are a victim of your own arrogance. Karen's lips tightened, her hands gripping the table edge. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Judy turned her gaze to Martha, who sat in quiet strength. Mrs. Ellis, did you ever tell Mrs. Whitfield you planned to sue her before filing your claim? Martha nodded softly. Yes, Your Honor. I wrote her a letter. I begged her to just return what was mine. I didn't want this. I only wanted to be treated fairly. That was the turning point, the human moment that shattered Karen's last illusion of control. For the audience, it was clear now. One woman sought fairness. The other sought power. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, power without integrity was a house built on sand. For most of the hearing, Martha Ellis had sat quietly, speaking only when spoken to. Her voice was steady, her manner respectful, the embodiment of grace under pressure. But even the strongest hearts have a limit. And Judge Judy's courtroom was about to witness the moment hers finally broke. Karen Whitfield, still clinging to the crumbling remnants of her superiority, had begun circling back to her performance. The calm mask was gone now, replaced by that smug, biting tone people use when they think charm will fix what truth has already shattered. Your Honor, she said, gesturing toward Martha with theatrical pity. This woman is confused. She doesn't understand modern real estate. I was trying to help her. She should be thanking me, not suing me, so I practically did her a favor. That word, favor, hung in the air like poison. Judge Judy glanced briefly at Martha, who was sitting so still that her hands trembled against the table. You could see it, the storm building just behind her eyes. For months she had endured humiliation. The late-night emails from Karen's legal team, threatening to ruin her reputation. The sleepless nights spent wondering how she'd pay her bills without that $48,000 money that represented her, husband's entire life savings, and now to be told in front of a live audience that the woman who stole from her had actually done her a favor? Something inside Martha snapped. Stop calling it a favor, she said quietly, her voice shaking. Karen turned toward her, eyebrows arched, as if being interrupted by someone beneath her rank was an offense. Excuse me. Martha looked up, not timidly, not fearfully, but with the raw honesty of someone who had been pushed too far. You didn't help me, she said louder now. You lied to me. You smiled at me while you took my money. Money my husband worked 40 years to earn. He trusted people. I trusted you. Her words silenced the room. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, don't make this about your husband. You signed the contract." Martha slammed her palm lightly on the table. "That isn't my signature," she said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "That's what I've been saying. You forged my name, and now you're standing here pretending it's my fault because you think I'm too old to fight back. You thought no one would believe me, because I don't have fancy lawyers or a camera-ready smile. But you were wrong." The audience broke into murmurs, a wave of empathy rippling through them. Judge Judy didn't interrupt. She knew the power of silence, of letting truth fill the air unchallenged. Martha took a deep breath, voice trembling. "I've been alone since my husband passed. I don't have much family. That house was the last piece of our life together, and you took it from me. Not just the money, but the peace that came with it. Every night, I sat at my kitchen table writing letters to you, hoping you'd see reason. Hoping maybe I'd wake up one morning and there'd be an apology. But you didn't even have the decency to answer. You just ignored me, like I was nothing." Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, capturing every line of anguish on her face. Karen tried to speak, but Judge Judy raised a hand, not in anger, but in warning. "Don't," she said sharply. "Not right now." For once, Karen stayed silent. Judge Judy leaned forward, her tone softer than usual. "Mrs. Ellis, I know this isn't easy, but you've done something most people never do. You stood up. You didn't let someone with more money, more influence, and more arrogance bully you into silence. And I want you to know that matters." Martha nodded weakly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Across the courtroom, Karen's jaw tightened, her perfectly controlled image fracturing into a mix of irritation and disbelief. In her mind, this wasn't how the story was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the one winning the audience, not losing them to a trembling widow. But the narrative had shifted. The cameras that once adored her were now drinking in every flash of guilt, every impatient glance, every defensive twitch. This wasn't her spotlight anymore. It was her exposure. And as the tears on Martha's face glistened under the courtroom lights, the viewers watching at home weren't seeing weakness. They were seeing truth, painful, unfiltered, and undeniable. For Judge Judy, this was the emotional inflection point. She'd seen thousands of liars, hundreds of manipulators, but very few victims with this much quiet dignity. She could feel it. The case had moved beyond money. It was about moral justice now, and soon she was going to deliver it. The energy in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had started as a civil dispute between two women had now turned into something else entirely. A moral showdown. The tension was so thick that you could hear the hum of the cameras and the faint, nervous tapping of a spectator's shoe. Judge Judy straightened in her chair, the authority radiating off her like heat. Gone was the detached professionalism of the first few minutes. In its place was the unmistakable presence of a woman who had decided enough was enough. "All right," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Let's reset." The room fell silent instantly. Even Karen, who had spent most of the trial trying to control the spotlight, instinctively sat a little straighter. Judy's gaze moved slowly between the two women, first toward Martha, still trembling slightly but holding her ground, then to Karen, whose confidence was visibly unraveling beneath the weight of her own arrogance. "Mrs. Whitfield," Judge Judy began, folding her hands on the bench, "you walked into my courtroom believing your money, your education and your image would carry you through this. You thought this was just another business meeting you could dominate with charm and deflection. But this," she gestured around, her tone sharp as a gavel strike, "isn't your world. This is my courtroom, and here truth outranks wealth every single time." Karen's mouth tightened. You could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes. The desperate calculations, the mental rehearsals of another excuse, another manipulation. But none of them seemed safe now. "Your Honor," she began cautiously, "I don't appreciate being spoken to like I'm some kind of—" "Stop," Judy interrupted, holding up a hand. The motion was small, but it carried the force of a judge who'd dismantled entire egos with a single gesture. "Don't finish that sentence. You're already digging fast enough." A few audience members stifled laughter, but Judy's tone didn't invite amusement. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was dissection. "Now," Judy continued, her voice dropping into that slow, deliberate cadence that every long-time viewer recognized, the "this is about to get real" tone. You claim Mrs. Ellis damaged your professional reputation. You claim she lied about you keeping her money. But so far I've seen no evidence of her lying. Only evidence that you've been less than truthful. Karen's cheeks flushed. That's not fair. You're taking her side because she's old and crying. That's emotional manipulation, Your Honor. You're supposed to be impartial. Judy didn't blink. I am impartial, she said evenly. I don't care about tears. I care about facts. And the facts are that you took money that wasn't yours. You used a document that appears to be falsified. And now you're trying to convince me that you're the victim. The courtroom stayed frozen. Every eye fixed on Karen as the last remnants of her arrogance began to crack. Let me explain something to you, Judy said, leaning slightly forward, her tone both sharp and instructive. This show isn't just about small claims. It's about the moral contract people make with each other. Honesty, fairness, and accountability. And when someone like you violates that contract, I don't just see a bad business person. I see a danger. Because people like you convince others that decency is weakness and greed is strength. And that, she tapped her pen once against the desk, is why people stop trusting each other. Karen swallowed hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing the tremor in her jaw and the faint glint of sweat forming along her temple. Judy turned to the bailiff. Bert, please bring me the file Mrs. Ellis submitted, the original transaction records. Bert handed over the folder, and Judy flipped through it methodically. Every page turned like a countdown. Mrs. Ellis, Judy said, her tone softening, you mentioned earlier that you documented everything. May I assume you still have the emails between yourself and the plaintiff? Martha nodded and reached into her neatly stacked folder. Her hands shook slightly, but she handed over a printed set of messages, carefully labeled, organized, and highlighted. Judy began to read. Her eyes moved quickly, her face unreadable until she stopped at one particular line. Well, she said quietly, almost to herself. Would you look at that? The audience leaned forward. Even Karen couldn't help herself. She tilted slightly to see what Judy was reading. What's that? She demanded. Judy didn't answer right away. She placed the papers flat on her desk and looked directly at Karen. It's an email you sent 3 days before the sale was cancelled, she said. It reads, and I quote, I've already moved the escrow into my account, easier for bookkeeping. Don't worry, she'll never notice. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Karen went pale. That's taken out of context. Judy raised a hand. The context is irrelevant. The admission isn't. The audience erupted in murmurs. Cameras zoomed in. Somewhere a producer mouthed to another crew member. We just got gold, but Judy wasn't done. She wasn't chasing a viral moment. She was building a verdict. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, voice low but lethal, we're far past business etiquette now. You have 30 seconds to tell me the truth of the whole truth before I make my ruling. Karen blinked, mouth open, caught between pride and panic. And that's when the real unraveling began. The courtroom had transformed into a pressure chamber. Every creak of a chair, every breath from the audience, every hum of the studio lights seemed amplified as Judge Judy began her deep dive into the evidence. Karen Whitfield sat stiffly, her flawless image beginning to crumble, while Martha Ellis sat quietly, clutching a small handkerchief in her lap, the same one her late husband used to carry to church every Sunday. Judy's tone was calm, clinical, but each word felt like a surgical incision. Mrs. Whitfield, let's start with the basics, she said, flipping through the printed emails. You admitted in writing that you moved your client's escrow funds into your personal account. Is that correct? Karen crossed her arms, defiant but visibly trembling. It was temporary, she said. Everyone in business does that. It's standard procedure when an escrow agent delays transfer authorization. I didn't steal it, Judy arched an eyebrow. Standard procedure? You're not an escrow agent, are you? No, but then you violated Florida escrow law by transferring funds you were not authorized to touch. Judy's pen tapped once against her desk. That's not a delay, Mrs. Whitfield. That's misappropriation. A collective murmur swept through the gallery. Karen's face flushed red, but she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. With all due respect, Your Honor, you're misinterpreting business flexibility. It's not uncommon. Judy leaned forward, cutting her off mid-sentence. What's uncommon is you thinking that kind of explanation works here. Don't play semantics with me. Words don't change facts. Karen's composure faltered again. She reached for her designer purse, pulling out a sleek tablet. I have screenshots, she said quickly, her tone desperate. Messages that prove Mrs. Ellis agreed to the deductions. She just doesn't remember. Judy gestured for the bailiff. Let's see them. Bert took the tablet and handed it to Judy, who scrolled for a few silent seconds. Then she looked up, and that slow, knowing smile crept across her face. These aren't screenshots, she said. They're mock-ups. Do you know how I know? She turned the tablet around for everyone to see. Because the timestamps are uniform. Every message you claim was sent over several weeks has the same minute and second stamp. Whoever created this forgot to change the metadata. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom, but Judy silenced it with a single glare. Karen's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible, my assistant. Stop blaming your assistant, Judy snapped. A lie is still a lie no matter who types it for you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen's breathing had grown shallow, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling against the table. She tried to steady herself, forcing a smirk, but the facade was gone. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker of panic behind her eyes and that tiny, unmistakable moment when a liar realizes the truth has finally caught up. Mrs. Ellis, Judy said, her tone softening, did you ever receive any written confirmation of those deductions? Martha shook her head. No, ma'am. I asked for receipts, but she said they were in processing. After that, she stopped answering my calls. Did you ever sign anything approving those charges? Never. Judy nodded slowly, then turned back to Karen. So not only do we have a falsified contract, an unauthorized transfer and fabricated messages, but we also have a deliberate attempt to deceive this court. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was sweating now, visibly flustered. I didn't mean to— Yes, you did, Judy interrupted. And that's the problem. You've been meaning to for years. This isn't your first manipulation. It's just the first one that finally found an audience large enough to see it. The audience murmured in agreement. Someone in the back whispered, she's done, but Judy wasn't finished. She tapped her folder again, producing one final document. There's one more piece of evidence, an affidavit from your former accountant. Karen's head snapped up. What? Judy read aloud. Client refused to document escrow reimbursements properly. When questioned, she stated, quote, what they don't know won't hurt them. The color drained from Karen's face. Judy set the file down with quiet finality. Mrs. Whitfield, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern of greed, deceit, and arrogance. You didn't just take money. You took advantage of trust. Karen's hands gripped the edge of the table, her diamond bracelet glinting under the harsh lights. This is ridiculous, she muttered, her voice trembling between rage and disbelief. I've worked too hard to be treated like a criminal by a TV show. Judy's eyes narrowed. Then you should have remembered you were still under oath. The audience gasped, knowing what that tone meant, the calm before the storm. Because next came the moment everyone watching would never forget, the clash that would define the episode. The viral showdown that turned Karen Whitfield from an untouchable millionaire into the most notorious figure in daytime courtroom history. The courtroom had turned into something electric, a living, breathing pressure cooker of judgment, tension, and disbelief. The lights overhead seemed brighter than before, glinting off the polished wood of Judge Judy's bench. The air conditioning hummed faintly, but the temperature in the room felt like it had risen 10 degrees. Everyone could feel it, the moment before detonation. Camera operators whispered into their headsets, repositioning slightly for tighter angles. They could sense they were minutes away from capturing daytime television history. The audience, seated in orderly rows, leaned forward as one, no longer passive observers but witnesses to a reckoning. And at the center of it all sat Karen Whitfield. Her pristine exterior had started to crumble. Her hair, once perfectly sculpted, now clung unevenly to her forehead. Her lipstick had smudged slightly at the corners, but what stood out most wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. The smug self-assurance was gone. In its place was the look of someone frantically trying to rewrite reality before it collapsed around her. Martha Ellis sat quietly across from her, still and composed, her tissue balled tightly in her fist. The tears were gone now. What remained was resolve, a kind of quiet strength that radiated from her even as she said nothing. Every time she glanced toward Judge Judy, there was gratitude in her eyes, not for vengeance, but for validation. Judge Judy, meanwhile, sat motionless behind her desk, studying Karen with that unnerving stillness she'd perfected over decades. Her pen hovered mid-air, unmoving. That silence, that deep, deliberate silence, was more powerful than any shouted reprimand. It stretched long enough for the audience to start holding their breath. Karen finally cracked. "Well," she said, her voice rising, brittle and defensive. "Aren't you going to say something, Your Honor? Or are we just going to sit here while the cameras make me out to be a monster?" Judy didn't flinch. "No one needs to make you out to be anything, Mrs. Whitfield," she said coolly. "You've done that yourself." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. Karen's face went scarlet. "This is insane!" she burst out, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "You're humiliating me on national television. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea how much money I've made? I built a real estate empire from nothing." Judy's pen came down softly on the desk. "And yet," she said, "you're sitting here on a weekday afternoon arguing over a stolen $48,000 from a 72-year-old widow. What does that say about the foundation of your empire?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, then back at the judge. Desperate, cornered. Judy continued, her tone razor-sharp but composed. "You came here thinking this was about a PR victory, that this courtroom was just another boardroom where you could outtalk, outspend, and outshine whoever stood in your way. But what you didn't count on, what you never understood, is that truth doesn't need polish. It doesn't need branding. It just is, and it's been sitting across from you the entire time." The camera panned to Martha, calm, unflinching, the embodiment of everything Karen wasn't. A hush fell over the audience again. Even the bailiff stood still, his hand resting lightly on his belt as though frozen in place. The only sound was the faint rhythmic tick of the courtroom clock. Judy turned back to Karen, lowering her voice to something almost surgical. "You said earlier that Mrs. Ellis should thank you. Tell me, what exactly should she thank you for? For taking her money? For lying to her? For dragging her through court just to soothe your own ego?" Karen's lip trembled. "You're twisting everything," she said weakly. "You don't understand what it's like being in my position. Everyone wants something from you. Everyone's trying to tear you down. I was just protecting myself." "From what?" Judy asked softly. "Accountability." The room broke into murmurs again, louder this time. The tension that had been building for nearly an hour finally found release through the crowd's reactions. Gasps, whispered commentary, shaking heads. Karen's hands trembled as she pointed toward the cameras. "This isn't justice, this is entertainment." Judy's eyes locked on hers. "Then consider this episode your encore performance," she said. The audience erupted into stunned laughter and applause, but Judy didn't smile. Not even a flicker. Her expression remained cold, professional, the look of a woman about to deliver one of the most viral takedowns of her career. "Let me make one thing clear, Mrs. Whitfield," she said, her tone dropping to that infamous quiet thunder that sent chills down spines. "This courtroom doesn't operate for your amusement or your image. It operates for the truth. And when the truth speaks, no amount of money can drown it out." The lights glared brighter. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily. Everyone could feel it. The storm was seconds away. And when it hit, it wouldn't just destroy Karen's case. It would destroy her illusion. It began with a single, cutting sentence, the kind Judge Judy had sharpened like a blade over decades in the courtroom. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said quietly, "I'm giving you one last opportunity to tell me the truth." The silence that followed wasn't just tense. It was suffocating. The audience sat motionless. Even the bailiff's posture stiffened, his jaw tightening as though bracing for impact. Karen's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted between Judy, the cameras, and Martha, the woman she had mocked, manipulated, and underestimated. "I am telling the truth," she said finally, forcing her voice into something that sounded confident but rang hollow. "I've been honest since day one. These people don't understand what it's like to build something from nothing. They're jealous. They want to see me fall. Jealous, Judy repeated slowly, setting down her pen. Her eyes narrowed. Of what exactly? Dishonesty, greed, the ability to twist reality until you start believing your own lies. Karen's lips parted in shock. You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Then enlighten me, Judy said, leaning forward slightly. Because all I see is a woman who can't take responsibility for her own actions. Karen slammed her palm on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I made a mistake, all right? One mistake. Everyone does it. Judy's voice stayed cool. A mistake is forgetting an appointment. A mistake is misplacing paperwork. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated theft. The word hit Karen like a slap. Theft, she hissed, her face turning crimson. I'm not some low-life criminal. I'm a successful woman who's built her entire life from hard work and intelligence. I don't belong here being scolded like a child, Judy finished for her. No, Mrs. Whitfield. Children can still learn. You, on the other hand, seem committed to your ignorance. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Karen's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Judy didn't stop. Her tone was calm, surgical, the voice of someone dismantling arrogance, brick by brick. You've spent years convincing people you're better than them, she continued. You measure worth in handbags, not honesty. In luxury cars, not loyalty. You believe status is a shield, that wealth somehow absolves you from decency. But here's the truth. Money doesn't erase moral debt. It amplifies it. Karen's composure was crumbling now. You're twisting this. I've done so much for people. I've donated to charities. I've mentored. Charity isn't morality, Mrs. Whitfield, Judy interrupted, her tone razor-sharp. You don't get to write checks as penance for your conscience. You can't buy forgiveness like a Birkin bag. The audience gasped again, this time followed by scattered applause that the bailiff half-heartedly tried to quiet. But Judy let it ride. Karen's breathing was shallow now, her hands trembling visibly. You're just trying to make me look bad for ratings, she snapped. You're a performer, that's all you are. You thrive on humiliating people like me. Judy leaned forward. Her voice dropped so low that the microphones had to strain to catch it. Mrs. Whitfield, if you feel humiliated, it's because the truth finally caught up with you, and it doesn't care about your image. The room went silent again. Even the cameras stopped panning. Everyone, audience, crew, defendant, was locked in that one suspended moment. Judy continued, her voice steady, relentless. Do you know what humility is? It's the ability to face the truth and accept it without excuse. You wouldn't recognize humility if it looked you in the eye and asked for its money back. Karen flinched, her jaw trembling. For the first time, her voice cracked. I think you're so perfect, don't you? She spat. Sitting up there on your throne, acting like you've never made a mistake in your life. Judy didn't blink. I've made mistakes. The difference is I learned from them instead of suing the people who pointed them out. The audience broke into stunned laughter and applause. But Judy wasn't finished, not even close. She stood up from her chair, a rare act that instantly changed the gravity of the room. The atmosphere shifted. The applause died. Everyone knew what that meant. Mrs. Whitfield, Judy said, her voice rising slightly, I have listened to you twist, deny, and manipulate for the last hour. I've watched you lie without shame, interrupt without respect, and posture as though wealth could substitute for character. Let me tell you something. Respect isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn. And right now you've earned exactly none. Karen's shoulders sagged. Her eyes glistened, though whether from anger or fear no one could tell. Judy paused, letting the silence expand until it filled the entire courtroom. Then she said it, the line that would later dominate headlines, memes, and video clips across the internet. You walked in here thinking you were untouchable, she said coldly. But arrogance has an expiration date. And today, it's yours, the audience erupted. Some clapped. Others stood in stunned disbelief. But all of them knew they'd just witnessed something unforgettable. Karen sat motionless, her face blank, as the cameras zoomed in on the woman who'd thought herself unstoppable, until she met someone who refused to bow. And then, as the applause faded and the lights held steady, Judge Judy gave a small nod to the bailiff. was time for the exposure, the proof that would destroy what little defense. Karen had left and turned her humiliation into a viral cautionary tale for the world to see. The air in the courtroom was electric, humming with the anticipation of something about to break wide open. The audience leaned in. Even the sound engineers forgot to breathe. Judge Judy stood, a motion so rare that every camera zoomed closer. Her tone had shifted from stern authority to surgical precision. What was about to happen wasn't punishment. It was exposure. "Mrs. Whitfield," Judy began, "throughout this hearing you've claimed that you acted in good faith. You said the transfer of escrow funds was temporary. You said you had the client's consent. You said your messages were legitimate." Karen, still seated, swallowed hard. "Because they were." "Interesting," Judy said coolly, "because my production team, in coordination with state investigators, reached out to your former assistant, Ms. Rachel Donovan." Karen's head snapped up. "What?" Judy nodded slightly toward the bailiff. He stepped forward and placed a thin file on the bench. "Miss Donovan provided us with something fascinating," Judy continued. "Your original email drafts, the ones you deleted before submitting your so-called evidence, and wouldn't you know it?" She opened the file, the pages whispering as they turned. "They tell a very different story." Karen's voice rose, strained and defensive. "That's illegal." "You can't just—" "Actually," Judy interrupted smoothly, "you gave written consent for discovery when you filed your claim. And I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone's trying to hide the truth." She lifted a printed email into view, her eyes never leaving Karen. "This one, dated March 14th, reads, 'Client is getting suspicious. If she pushes back, I'll threaten legal action. Old people hate paperwork.'" Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a wave crashing against marble. Martha's eyes filled with tears. The audience murmured in disbelief. Karen's face drained of color. That's taken out of context." "I didn't mean—" "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," Judy said dryly. "But there's more. March 18th. Make sure the receipts look messy. If she tries to verify with escrow, delay it. Say the office is transitioning systems." The room erupted in whispers. Cameras clicked. Even the bailiff's jaw clenched in visible disgust. Karen's hands trembled now. I didn't write that. Rachel must have forged." Judy slammed her palm down on the bench, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "Enough!" The outburst silenced the room instantly. Judy leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Do you know how many times I've heard that excuse in my career? It wasn't me. Someone else did it. You'd be amazed how many people suddenly find invisible assistance when the truth shows up with receipts." Karen's breathing was ragged now, her composure completely gone. Judy turned her attention to the courtroom audience and, for a brief moment, spoke to them directly, as though addressing every viewer watching from home. "This," she said, holding up the papers, "is why trust matters. Because when people like Mrs. Whitfield get away with deceit, everyone loses faith. In contracts, in business, in justice, and that rot spreads." The audience was dead silent. No one moved. Then Judy turned back to Karen. "Do you know what else Miss Donovan provided, Mrs. Whitfield?" Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "No." Judy picked up a tablet from her desk and tapped the screen. A recording played, tinny but clear through the courtroom speakers. Karen's voice, unmistakable, filled the air. "If she's too naive to read the fine print, that's her problem. I don't babysit old women. Money doesn't feel bad when it's in my account." The room exploded. Audience members gasped aloud. One woman covered her mouth in horror. Even the stenographer froze mid-keystroke. Karen's hand flew to her chest. "That was private." That's an invasion of—" "That," Judy said sharply, "is you, unfiltered, unedited, and undisputed." For a long, terrible moment, the courtroom fell completely silent. Karen sat there, shaking, pale, her image of control shattered into dust. Martha watched quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then Judy spoke again softly this time. "Do you want to know what I hear when I listen to that recording? Not greed, not entitlement. Fear, the kind of fear that comes from someone who's been lying so long they've forgotten where the truth begins." Karen's lips quivered. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. Judy nodded once, almost sadly. "Yes, you did. You just didn't expect consequences." The bailiff stepped forward, retrieving the documents from Judy's desk. The cameras zoomed in on Karen's trembling hands. Judge Judy's voice filled the silence, cold and resolute. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation and financial exploitation. And while I can't impose criminal charges, I can ensure this file finds its way to the proper authorities. Karen's eyes widened in horror. You wouldn't... Judy leaned forward, her expression unflinching. Mrs. Whitfield, you mocked this courtroom. You mocked honesty. You mocked me. And the irony is, you called yourself self-made. Well, today, you've made yourself something indeed as a cautionary tale. The audience burst into applause. Not wild cheering, but steady, rhythmic, cathartic applause. The kind that comes when justice doesn't just win, it lands. Karen collapsed back into her chair, staring blankly ahead. Martha reached for her tissue again, not to cry, but to quietly whisper, "Thank you." And then Judy said, almost softly, "Don't thank me. Mrs. Ellis, thank yourself for not letting people like her teach you to stop believing in good." The cameras froze on Karen's pale face as the words echoed across the courtroom. The trap had been sprung. The truth had been laid bare, and all that remained now was the judgment. The courtroom was frozen in stunned silence. Karen Whitfield sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, her perfectly curated world now lying in shards around her. The hum of the cameras, the shifting of audience members, even the faint creak of the air vents seemed amplified. Every person in that room knew what was coming next, and that there would be no escaping it. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses, folded them with deliberate care, and set them beside her notepad. That small measured motion carried more weight than any gavel. "Mrs. Whitfield," she began, her tone calm, almost surgical. "I've spent my life in courtrooms. I've seen thieves who cry, liars who smile, and manipulators who quote scripture. But very few have managed to disguise selfishness as sophistication quite like you." Karen blinked rapidly, her breath shallow. I didn't mean for it to..." Judy cut her off with a raised hand. "Stop. You've done enough talking. You've wasted this court's time with lies. You've humiliated a decent woman, and you've turned a courtroom into your personal stage. It ends now." The tension was suffocating. Even the bailiff had gone still, his hand resting lightly on the back of Karen's chair, as though bracing for impact. "This court finds," Judy continued, her voice rising now with that unmistakable rhythm, the cadence of justice about to fall, "that your claim against Mrs. Ellis is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay her full restitution in the amount of $48,000, the funds you took under false pretenses." Gasps erupted from the audience. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. 48? You can't do that. That's not fair. Fair? Judy thundered, standing now, her presence filling the room. You want to talk about fairness? Fairness is a 72-year-old widow trusting you with the last memory of her husband's home. Fairness is believing that people still honor their word. Fairness is not walking into a courtroom after stealing from a grieving woman and thinking your designer suit makes you innocent. Karen's voice cracked, panic bleeding into her words. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Judy snapped. You built a life out of manipulation. You wore charm like armor and arrogance like perfume. But underneath all of it, there's nothing. Just greed in heels. The audience burst into applause. But Judy didn't let it distract her. She wasn't here for entertainment. She was here to end this. She turned toward the bailiff. Mr. Bird, please provide this court's findings to the state attorney's office for review. There are grounds for a criminal investigation into financial fraud and elder exploitation. Karen went pale, her jaw trembling. No, please. You can't do that. This will ruin me. Judy's tone softened, but her words were sharper than ever. No, Mrs. Whitfield, you ruined yourself. All I did was turn the lights on. The courtroom erupted again, applause, gasps, murmurs. The cameras zoomed in on Karen's face. Shock, then fear, then something that almost looked like regret. But it came too late. Judy sat back down, reclaiming her glasses. Let this serve as a reminder, she said, voice steady and cold, that success without integrity is failure in disguise. You can buy property, handbags, cars, and power. But respect? She shook her head. That's earned in how you treat people, especially when you think no one's watching. Karen's eyes glistened. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her voice, The weapon she'd always used to dominate others had finally abandoned her. Martha Ellis wiped a quiet tear and whispered a small, trembling, "Thank you, Your Honor." Judy looked at her and nodded once. "You don't need to thank me. You already won the moment you refused to give up." Then, for the audience and the millions watching online, Judy delivered the line that would echo across social media for months. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. The gavel came down. Crack! Case dismissed. Karen slumped in her chair, staring at the polished wood floor as the bailiff collected the papers. Her empire, her image, her control had vanished in less than an hour. The cameras lingered for one final close-up, not on Judge Judy, not on Martha, but on Karen, the once flawless woman now small, fragile, and utterly alone under the weight of her own downfall. As the applause swelled and the credits music began to roll, Judy turned to the audience with her classic final warning. Arrogance might win the spotlight, but truth wins the courtroom. If you believe justice should always hold the powerful accountable, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment with "Truth wins" if you stand with Judge Judy's message. No amount of wealth can buy integrity. By the time the courtroom lights dimmed and the audience began to file out, the story was already spreading. Clips were uploaded within minutes, first by fans who'd been in the studio audience, then by courtroom channels, and soon by every major social media platform on the planet. The fall of Karen Whitfield, once celebrated as the queen of suburban real estate, was no longer confined to Judge Judy's courtroom. It had gone global. Within 2 hours, the hashtag #GreedHasNoDefense was trending across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. Viewers around the world were sharing the moment when Judge Judy held up the incriminating email and said, "All I did was turn the lights on." Memes flooded every corner of the internet. Karen's shocked face frozen mid-gasp, overlaid with captions like "When Karma Has Wi-Fi" and "Justice Served Luxury Edition." News outlets pounced on the story. The New York Post ran the headline, "Real Estate Queen Crashes and Burns on Judge Judy. $48,000 Lie Exposed." Morning talk shows replayed the viral moment on loop. Legal analysts dissected Judy's every word. Even celebrity influencers weighed in, some applauding the verdict, others warning about the dangers of greed and arrogance. The clip where Judge Judy said, "Success without integrity is failure in disguise," became an instant soundbite for motivational speakers and justice-themed TikToks, but the true aftermath wasn't measured in views or headlines. It was in the dismantling of Karen's world. Within 48 hours, 3 of her luxury listings were pulled by their owners. The brokerage she'd worked for released a public statement. "We uphold the highest ethical standards." Effective immediately, Karen Whitfield is no longer affiliated with our company. Her website was flooded with negative reviews. Former clients came forward with eerily similar stories. Delayed payments, missing funds, false promises. One client even posted a photo of Karen's old marketing billboard with the words "Trust me" replaced by "Try me." It went viral overnight. Then came the financial avalanche. Her business account was frozen pending investigation. The state licensing board announced a formal review of her real estate credentials, and the very clients she had once bullied into silence were now uniting, filing a collective civil suit against her for damages. For Karen, the crash was public, merciless, and irreversible. Reporters camped outside her gated community, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who'd once bragged about being untouchable. When she finally emerged, wearing oversized sunglasses and moving quickly toward her car, she was met not with admiration, but with shouts of, "Where's Martha's money?" And "Did Judge Judy teach you humility yet?" She drove off without answering. Meanwhile, something far more beautiful was happening on the other side of the story. Martha Ellis returned home to find her mailbox overflowing, not with bills or threats, but with letters. Hundreds of handwritten notes from strangers across the country. Veterans who thanked her for her honesty. Widows who said her courage gave them strength. People who'd been scammed, manipulated, or bullied, all saying the same thing. "You reminded us that integrity still matters." A small-town news outlet ran a profile on her, calling her the woman who humbled greed. Local charities began reaching out, asking her to speak at community events about trust, perseverance, and standing up for what's right. She didn't see herself as a hero, just someone who refused to stay silent. When a producer from the show called to tell her that her episode had reached 150 million views in 3 days, she was speechless. "It wasn't about going viral," she said softly. "It was about being seen, being believed." Even Judge Judy herself addressed the episode in a rare post-verdict interview. Sitting behind her iconic bench, she told reporters, "The law doesn't just punish wrongdoing. It teaches it a lesson. And sometimes the best lessons are televised." Karen, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. Her social media accounts went dark. Her name became a synonym for arrogance. "Don't pull a Whitfield" became slang among business circles for self-inflicted ruin. The internet had turned her downfall into a parable, one that blended justice, irony, and poetic closure in a single unforgettable story. And through it all, Martha remained exactly who she'd been from the start, quiet, humble, and kind. She didn't celebrate her victory with anger. She donated half of the restitution to a local housing charity in her late husband's name, saying if that money can help someone find an honest home, then it's finally where it belongs. The episode closed with a simple, chilling caption across the screen as the viral clip replayed in slow motion. "When arrogance meets accountability, the truth always wins. If you believe justice is strongest when it's public, hit that subscribe button and comment, 'Truth always wins.' Share this story so more people see what happens when power meets integrity and loses." Weeks later, when the world had moved on to its next viral obsession, one image still lingered across millions of screens. Judge Judy standing tall behind her bench, delivering the line that had now become immortal. "Success without integrity is failure in disguise." It wasn't just a courtroom quote anymore. It was a statement, a mantra, a mirror held up to an entire culture obsessed with appearances over principles. Schools used the clip in ethics classes. Motivational speakers opened conferences with it. Even corporate HR seminars began citing the Whitfield case as a lesson in professional accountability. But beneath the headlines and hashtags, the real legacy of that day lived quietly in 2 women whose lives had collided in that small television courtroom. Martha Ellis continued her simple life, but something inside her had shifted. Not pride, not vengeance, but peace. For months she'd carried the weight of humiliation, of feeling small and unseen. Yet one day of truth had lifted it completely. When she spoke about the experience at her church's Sunday gathering, she said softly, "I didn't win money. I won my voice back." Her words were met with applause, not loud but deeply heartfelt. And in that small hall, surrounded by neighbors who'd once pitied her, she finally saw respect shining back in their eyes. Karen Whitfield, on the other hand, faced a far darker reckoning. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. Her company dissolved within a month. Her former clients pursued damages, and bankruptcy filings followed soon after. But her punishment didn't come from the courts. It came from the mirror. According to one quiet report in a local paper, she had been seen volunteering at a women's shelter several months later. No makeup, no cameras, no entourage. Just a woman stacking boxes of donated clothes. When asked by a reporter if she was the same Karen from the viral case, she hesitated, then nodded. "I used to think power meant control," she said quietly. "Now I think it means conscience." It wasn't a redemption arc, not yet. But it was a beginning. Judge Judy, meanwhile, received thousands of letters from viewers, veterans, mothers, young professionals, all thanking her for reminding the world that truth still mattered. During one interview, when asked why the case resonated so deeply, she simply smiled and said, "Because people are starving for justice that feels human." And that's what made this story different. It wasn't about laws or contracts. It was about values, about how decency, once considered ordinary, had become rare enough to trend. The viral clip eventually passed 250 million views, making it the most watched courtroom moment in television history. But for those who truly understood its meaning, the lesson was timeless. Greed destroys itself. Arrogance blinds itself. And truth doesn't need to fight. It just needs to wait. As the episode faded to black on its final rebroadcast, the narrator's voice echoed one last time, wrapping up the story that had captivated the world. In the end, wealth fades, pride falls, but character, that's the real currency of justice. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound echoing like thunder, And the words appeared across the screen in bold gold letters. When arrogance meets accountability, the world remembers. If you believe truth never needs defending, only revealing, smash that like button, subscribe for more real courtroom justice, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. Integrity isn't an accessory, it's a legacy.